Shotgun. Llama.
Hello everyone, it's time for another quick tutorial in Redstone and Minecraft. Today we're going to be talking about pulses and clocks and all that nice stuff. So, first of all, what is a pulse? A pulse is just a short redstone signal, and typically you aren't interested in when it's on and off, but you're more interested in when it turns off or when it turns off. So, over here we have a simple pulse generator. Now, I have the volume for blocks turned down because this thing would be quite loud if I didn't, and that's a disadvantage of it, but it's fairly simple, and it's kind of hacky, kind of, I don't know, I can't think of a better way to call it, but this is going to constantly output a pulse like that, and you can just run that off to whatever you want. They're quick, short pulses. It's probably the simplest you can possibly get in this game. But let's move on to something a little more efficient. Over here we have something called a clock, and this is how, basically you'll see if the delay between each pulse is determined by these repeaters, by how much delay there is in each one and how many there are. So if I run a quick pulse through here until you turn it on, I'm going to flick this lever on and off real quick. You'll see what happens is it circles the thing, and this bit either will turn on for a while and then turn off, and then it'll alternate like that for certain amounts of time. Now that can also be used to generate a pulse. This is usually a more controlled sort of thing, but both of these will generate pulses continually. Let's say we want something to turn on or, oops, that's not what I wanted to do, to turn on or off when something happens. That's not quite what I mean to say. I'll show you what I mean. So, boom, dun. I need this piston. Sorry guys, just gotta grab the stuff, put it like here, sticky piston. It could be done with a sand and a normal piston, but you usually don't want to do that. So I put this repeater here, and do that, and stick a lever here. You'll see what happens when I turn it on. Oops, that's not what I want to do. When I turn it on, there's a quick pulse over there. It's pretty short and it goes away quickly, and it's only when I turn it on and not when I turn it off. So this is not only a pulse generator, but it's also a pulse limiter and a rising edge detector. Now a rising edge detector means that this gives a pulse when this turns on. And also if it receives a pulse going in, it will be able to shorten the pulse to whatever this is set to. So 1, 2, 3, 4 ticks. I can increase the length of that pulse to say 3 ticks. Alright, I think it's actually 3 half ticks, but it's longer than what it was before. Now, let's say we want to make a falling edge detector, which is what happens if you have something like this, but instead of giving a pulse when it turns on, it gives a pulse when it turns off. Well, one simple way of doing that would just be to invert the input. So if you put a torch here, and then I put a lever here, you'll see it does the same thing, except it gives a pulse when it turns off. Like that. See? Now let's go over here to something called a dual edge detector. This gives a pulse when it turns on or when it turns off. This is fairly simple to make, fairly easy to understand also, and it basically just operates on the function that a redstone block, while it's moving by a piston, does not actually give power to anything because it's not really occupying a block space. It's an entity while it moves, which can't provide power. So you flick the switch. Let me make the output a little more visible. So if I flick the switch here, that'll flash on and off for a short time, and then it'll stay off. So this, as you can see, it gives a pulse when I turn it on or when I turn it off. So it's a dual edge detector. Now this here, you see we have our rising edge detector, but there's this little nonsense happening over here. What's that for? Well, like this is a pulse limiter, this is a pulse extender. It increases the length of a pulse rather than reducing it. And it's made, this one is a repeater line, and I'm not sure if that's exactly what it's called, but that's how it works, and it's very simple. You just have it go into a repeater like this. You have a half slab here so that the signal only goes one way, a block here, and then it goes down here, and because repeaters power the block they lead into, this repeater will power this block, and then this redstone, this repeater will power this block, and this redstone, and the greater the delay on each of these repeaters, that'll increase the length of the pulse. So this should be fairly easy to see. If you just go over here, look at that redstone there. If I turn this on, you see that created a much longer pulse than if I just use the one over here. Just give me a second to show you. So you see that pulse was significantly shorter than this one, and you can extend it even further or change the delay to get different lengths of time. Now, over here we have something kind of interesting. This can be called a pulse multiplier. Basically, what it does is, as long as it is receiving an on signal, it will produce a pulse. But if it's not, then it won't. So if I turn this lever on, it'll produce these short pulses. Makes sense, fairly simple, right? Yeah, of course it is. So basically what you need to know for this is you just have a comparator in subtraction mode. It can't be in it has to be in subtraction mode, leading into a block, and then the output from the other side of that block leads back into the comparator side. That's also a fairly simple pulse generator also if you just have this constantly being on. But this is a pulse multiplier because it will only do so when it's receiving the on signal. And I didn't show you this, but if I'd leave this lever on the clock, it would basically become useless because it would all fill up with on, and if I turn this off, that'll still stay on. So I need to reset it by breaking a wire or doing something else and then replacing it. Over here we have something called a pulse divider, or a pulse counter, and what it does is for every certain number of pulses it receives, then it gives an output pulse. So we have, well, this is a 5 pulse, I believe. Yeah, 5 pulse counter. We have 5 hoppers and 1 dropper. The dropper leads into the hoppers, and the hoppers go in a cycle to the dropper. Over here we have something I didn't really show you, but it's another sort of pulse generator. It's a rising edge. It is a NOR gate, I think it's called. You see, it gives that pulse when I turn it on. Well, actually, it's an inverted pulse, meaning that it gives an off signal as a pulse, and it's usually on all the other times. So there's an item that circulates through these hoppers. Currently it's here. I just used the hopper because why not? And every time it receives a pulse, it goes to the next one. Now it starts here, or that's where you'd want to start it, and eventually it makes it to this dropper, where it not only leads it back into the first hopper, but it also gives a signal out to this comparator, which I've hooked up to a repeater, and run back over here. So we'll see the pulse, and one more, and you see that pulse was there. Now if I do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, there's a pulse. And you can change the number of pulses just by adding more hoppers to it, making it longer. Or if you want it to be an even number, you just replace this here with another dropper, or replace this with a dropper. Basically, you just have to make sure you have another dropper somewhere, because droppers will do so instantly without needing another pulse. And that is basically all you need to know, for now anyway, until we actually start utilizing them, about pulses and clocks. Once we actually utilize them in other things, which we will do soon, then you'll want to experiment more, try different designs, try different uses. And I guess there's one more thing I want to show you, just something simple. You can invert the output of basically any pulse generator to get an inverted pulse generator. And like I said, that just gives you an off output for the pulse instead of an on output. And if I do this, which here and here, and just make the output visible. There's a kind of simpler one I can make by doing this. And when it turns on, only when it turns on, not when it turns off, it gives an off output. And I believe all I have to do to change that is, I don't know. I don't use this design, like, at all. So mess around with it however you want. That is all there is for this tutorial. We'll be getting back to this when we get to actually applying them to different things, but for now it's good that you know what pulses are and how to make simple pulse generators. So I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.